The scene opens with a drug lord called Lorenzo Vitale, driving with his grandson to a secluded winery in Sicily. There, he notices some of his henchmen are dead. He tells his grandson to stay in the car while he checks what the danger is. One of his henchmen emerges from the house to tell him that the killer is still inside, waiting for the drug lord. He enters the house to confront the intruder, and as he walks toward the intruder's location, he sees his henchmen murdered, each one killed more horrifically than the last. Completely shaken, he continues until he eventually arrives at the intruder's location. The intruder happens to be Robert McCall, the equalizer, sitting comfortably even though at gunpoint. The drug lord, perplexed, asks Robert his reason for intruding. Robert tells the drug lord that he came to take back the items stolen by the drug lord in a cyber heist, which didn't belong to him. Robert warns the drug lord and his henchmen, even giving them time to reconsider their actions, but to no avail. Robert kills all three of the henchmen and shoots the drug lord last. Wounded, the drug lord crawls away to safety, but Robert follows him slowly and shoots him in the eye. He then calmly takes a key, opens the winery's vault, and recoups the money stolen. While leaving the winery, Robert is shot in the back by Vitale's adolescent grandson. Robert considers suicide due to his injury, but finds his gun out of bullets. While driving on the Amalfi Coast, Robert pulls over and slips into unconsciousness from shock. He is found and rescued by Gio Bonucci, a local carabiniere. Bonucci brings him to a remote coastal Italian town called Altamonte, where he is treated by a small-town doctor named Enzo Aricio. Robert wakes up and gets a little acquainted with Enzo. They exchange pleasantries, names, and reassurance of his safety. Robert then goes back to sleep throughout the night. 3 days later, Robert emerges from the house with feeble strength and meets Enzo outside. Enzo checks his health progress and advises him to take a walk around town for rejuvenation and to get acquainted with the surroundings. So he follows Enzo's advice and walks around the town, and he continues walking until he reaches a coffee shop where he decides to sit and rest. He orders tea from the waiter, who politely obliges. This is where he meets Amina, the shop owner, for the first time. While he is having his coffee, Gio, the police officer, approaches him and returns Robert's car keys. Gio enlightens him about the townspeople of Altamonte and assures Robert that he would not pose a danger to the town or its residents. Later that day, Robert makes an anonymous phone call to CIA officer Emma Collins to tip her off about the winery's role and location in the illegal drug trade disguised as normal business transactions in Sicily. The next day, Robert notices a member of the Camorra extorting money from a shop owner, which displeases him. Later, Robert decides to have coffee, and this is when Amina introduces herself to him. Over time, Robert becomes well acquainted with the townspeople and feels more at home. One day, Robert overhears Marco Quaranta, a high-ranking Camorra member, pressuring local store owner Angelo for payments. This displeases Robert and subtly puts Marco under his radar. After the extortion incident, Marco and his men ride motorcycles to meet Vicente Quaranta, Marco's elder brother and the head of the Camorra Mafia. Meanwhile, it turns out that Vincent is also the mastermind involved in the harassment and killing of villagers in an attempt to coerce them out of their housing and take over Altamonte for commercialization purposes. Vincent exits to meet his brother. Robert continues to enjoy his stay with Enzo and offers to run errands as a sign of appreciation. He goes to buy fish from Angelo and is complimented by Amina, who walks in and remarks about his hat. Angelo gives the fish for free to Robert, considering him a friend of Enzo's. Meanwhile, Collins, Frank Conroy, Collins' superior, and other CIA operatives arrive at the winery and find millions in cash along with bags of phenethylene tablets hidden in a storeroom, confirming Robert's tipped information. Collins and her superior are shocked at how this operation was undertaken without their slightest knowledge and plan to delve deeper to unearth this criminal development. Enzo checks Robert's health status and confirms that Robert is fit to leave. Robert questions Enzo's hospitality towards a stranger like him, to which Enzo says he knew Robert was a good person. This puts Robert in a conundrum about whether to leave or stay. After a prayer session at church, Vincent meets Marco to encourage him to use extreme measures to quickly coerce the townspeople into giving in. Robert prepares to leave town when he notices the townspeople in distress. It turns out to make an example, The Camorra firebombs Angelo's fish store as the entire town watches. Angelo and his family burst into tears knowing this is their main source of livelihood. This incident enrages Robert as he sits in church, and he decides to stay and help rebuild the shop alongside the people. Bonucci reviews the video of the firebombing and calls the Italian Central Police for an inquiry. One night at the cafe, as Robert is being served his tea, Amina takes an interest in understanding Robert. She asks about his favorite dish, and after learning it, she offers to take him on a tour of the delicacies of Altamonte. They become more acquainted and socially connected with other townspeople in a merry and serene environment. Things return to normal as Angelo's shop is restored, bringing life in Altamonte back to its vivid state once more. Robert now seems to find purpose and peace in this town. Meanwhile, Collins has tracked Robert to Altamont and knows that Robert was behind the killings at the vineyard. Collins secretly tries to spy on him, but Robert, being a veteran in that line of work, already notices her. Instead of confrontation, she joins Robert and engages in a conversation, subtly steering it into an interrogation to uncover Robert's true identity and how he knew about the tip. However, Robert remains tight-lipped and doesn't reveal anything. Gio arrives at his daughter's school to pick her up, but discovers that she has been abducted. A call comes through telling him to come home, where he finds his family held hostage by Marco and his henchmen. Along with his wife and daughter, Bonucci is then attacked, beaten, and brutalized in front of his wife and kids for interfering in their operations. Gio goes to Enzo for medical assistance and stumbles into Robert. Embarrassed, he leaves. Robert senses it involves the Camorra group. After a rejuvenating jog, Robert is met by Collins again, and she confesses she couldn't uncover Robert's identity. But Robert wants Collins to find out why Lorenzo was using Sicily as his base for the drug smuggling operations from the Middle East into Europe, considering Sicily is the most heavily guarded port in the region. She leaves, promising to return with more information. Sometime later, Marco interrupts Gio during his family dinner, harasses him, and demands that Bonucci set up a boat for them. Overhearing this, Robert watches them intensely, which attracts Marco to his table. Robert requests them to move their operations to a different location. When Marco refuses, Robert forcefully grabs Marco's wrist, compelling him to dismiss his henchmen and put his gun down. Marco disgracedly leaves the restaurant. Marco comes out to meet his men and angrily contemplates how he is going to kill Robert. His van accidentally rams into one of his men, crushing him against a wall. Robert emerges from the mist and kills Marco, watching him indifferently in the eye as his life passes away. Gio and the local police find Marco, his henchmen's bodies, and some drugs in the back of the van. Meanwhile, a Rome station is bombed by Syrian terrorists, and Collins discovers that the drug money from Lorenzo was funding their activities in Italy. She figures out that the Syrians are in Sicily. With the help of the local police, Collins begins hunting down cells of terrorists in Sicily, successfully interrogating one inmate who gives out the location so they obtain sufficient information to raid a supplier base and confiscate more drugs. Meanwhile, the head of police in Naples rushes to Vincent's apartment to warn him during his brother's funeral. The head of police in Naples tries to warn Vincent to halt operations to avoid suspicion and detection. Vincent threatens and tortures the head of police from Naples, ultimately cutting off his right hand to force him to find the person responsible for Marco's death. He is escorted to his car and sent to the hospital with a warning from Vincent. Before Collins can be escorted to the rigged car bomb by Vincent's henchmen, Robert calls her to a halt to warn her. Thanks to Robert's warning, Collins survives the explosion and is rushed to the hospital. There, she tells Frank everything she now knows. Vincent personally comes to the town square of Altamonte, with Gio Bonucci brutally manhandled, threatening to shoot Bonucci in front of the entire town if Robert does not reveal himself. Eventually, Robert does reveal himself, telling Vincent that because of these people he now knows what peace feels like, and he won't allow anyone to take that away from him. He asks Vincent not to shoot him in front of the people, but Vincent disagrees and aims to shoot. But before Vincent can kill him, Enzo gives a warning shot, beckoning Vincent's henchmen to lower their guns, causing Vincent and the rest of the Camorra to retreat with plans to retaliate the following day. Vincent gets home that night and discusses with them how grotesque it would be in a manner to kill Robert. Later that night, while the people of Altamonte are celebrating their festivities and religious sanctities, Robert infiltrates Vincent's home and stealthily kills his bodyguards from the guard at the parking lot and using a guard in distress as a decoy until all are inhumanely eliminated. Vincent wakes up to see the roofing glass almost collapse on him, which he narrowly escapes, but is injured by the broken glass. He then patrols around the whole house from all rooms, seeing his security details scattered lifelessly in search of the intruder, but to no avail. He is knocked out by Robert. Then, Robert forces Vincent to take a lethal dose of his own drugs, unties him, and sings to taunt him as Vincent walks out and looks for help. He continues to follow him in a taunting manner until they reach an alley where Vincent overdoses and dies. Robert visits Collins at the hospital and explains his reasons for taking the money from Lorenzo Vitale's vineyard, claiming it belonged to a pensioner who was a victim of cyber heist. He tells Collins to return the money to the pensioner. Through Collins, Robert returns the money he had taken from the winery to an elderly couple's pension fund. This couple's pension fund was hacked, and the money was stolen by Lorenzo, which makes them emotional. Collins is promoted and receives a note from Robert congratulating her, declaring her mother would be proud of her. This reveals Collins to be the daughter of Robert's longtime friend and colleague, Susan Plummer. With the Quaranta brothers dead, Robert celebrates with the locals after their football team's victory and is at home and at peace.